Welcome to Engage, leading conversations that matter. Join in the conversation. Send an email to engage@cfpublic.org. Send a recorded talkback message on the free Central Florida Public Media app. Leave a voicemail by calling 407-273-2300, extension 246. Engage is made possible with the support of listeners like you.
You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. Coming up, lawmakers on the Hill are preparing for tomorrow's government funding vote. We'll check in with Representatives Darren Soto and Bill Posey to get the scoop from both sides of the aisle. And later, we'll look at the challenges hurricanes and other extreme weather events present to people trying to obtain sexual and reproductive health products. First, though, a tropical storm is developing in the Gulf that could strengthen into a major hurricane. Helene is in the forecast and heading toward Florida. Marion, Orange, and Seminole counties are among the locations opening sandbag operations today to help residents prepare for the potential of heavy rainfall. Megan Borowski, senior meteorologist for the Florida Public Radio Emergency Network, joins Engage with the latest track and timeline of Helene.
Helene, as of 11 o'clock Tuesday morning, just strengthened into a tropical storm. We're expecting it to move slowly over the next 24 to 36 hours between Cancun and the western tip of Cuba into the southern Gulf of Mexico. It's during that time that we do expect it to strengthen into a hurricane. But really, overnight Wednesday into Thursday is when it should accelerate. And that's good news for us, because even though it will be strengthening as it accelerates through the Gulf of Mexico, it will be moving quickly. So we won't have impacts for as long as maybe what could be the case if steering weren't as strong. So a hurricane by Wednesday, major hurricane potentially by Thursday morning. We are expecting landfall somewhere over Florida's Big Bend. But I will note that within the cone of uncertainty is the Emerald Coast and the Panhandle, all the way down to just the Tampa Bay area. So still that entire region expecting quite catastrophic impacts as Helene does approach landfall on Thursday.
Just hearing you say catastrophic impacts, is that kind of a foregone conclusion? We have to see where it goes?
Well, we will have to see where it goes in terms of who's going to get the worst of the impacts. But right now, peak surge forecast is for Florida's Big Bend, and that's 10 to 15 feet. And that's why I use the word catastrophic, because 10 to 15 feet of storm surge inundation, that is very, very impactful, dangerous, and life-threatening. The silver lining here, there's two things, I suppose, is we have a storm that is forecasted to move quickly, so we won't have a long duration event. And it is expected to make landfall in a less populated area, but this does not detract from the fact that the folks that do live in Florida's Big Bend, they're going to be, really up against a very strong system, a high-end Cat 2 or a low-end major Category 3 hurricane on Thursday.
You mentioned that this latest track is kind of good news for people here in Central Florida.
Right.
Any impacts we can expect?
Oh, absolutely. We can start, to experience impacts as soon as tomorrow. During the evening hours, we are expecting heavier rainfall to begin to lift from south to north. We've kind of got an interesting setup here. We have Helene that's going to be entering the Gulf of Mexico, and then a mid-latitude weather system, a trough of low pressure that's going to be entering the Mississippi Valley. And so both of those are going to help to increase the chance for storms across the I-4 corridor tomorrow evening. There isn't it's not out of the realm of possibility that we could get a couple of tornado warnings tomorrow along the I-4 corridor, and even tropical storm force wind gusts arriving tomorrow night. So all of those threats are in play for Central Florida. Just because you might not be directly along the coastline doesn't mean you're not going to feel effects from Helene.
Megan, it feels like we just got a break in the last couple of days from all this rain. We're in that pattern, like every afternoon, just downpour rain.
Yep.
Any concerns about possible flooding for people?
Oh, absolutely. We are looking at a risk for flash flooding. The worst of the rainfall from Helene is going to be in the Panhandle, but really from Orlando west to the Gulf of Mexico, we've got a level 2 out of 4 risk for flash flooding from Helene, really Wednesday, Thursday, and into Friday, we'll start to see a downtick in impacts there. Helene will finally lift to the northward. But, locally up to 6 inches of rain can't be ruled out. Our highest chances really are going to be to the west, closer to the Gulf Coast and closer to the Tampa metro. But we can't rule out widespread, 2 to 4, maybe 5 inches, and then locally pinpoints of about a half foot of rain. And of course, because we've been getting those afternoon thunderstorms, the ground is primed to not be able to take too much more. And so especially in urban areas, poorly drained areas, low-lying areas, we'll see that potential for even more widespread flash flooding.
Just curious, Megan, as a meteorologist who tracks the tropics and has been in
Yeah.
Florida for years, anything about Helene in particular that you've got your eye on or is maybe a bit troubling?
Well, the fact that this thing is supposed to really deepen very quickly, it is going to likely rapidly intensify over the next few days. This morning we just had a potential tropical cyclone. Now it's a tropical storm. And really over the next 36 hours, we're expecting rapid intensification. So just the fact that it is developing so quickly and it is going to come in with a punch over the next few days.
We still have a ways to go with the Atlantic hurricane season running through November.
Yep.
Typically, right around here, the end of September, is this a busy time for the tropics?
Usually, I mean, if you remember, 2 years ago we had Ian right around the same time. Really, the peak of season and when we experience most tropical activity is really in September. The climatological peak of season is September 10th, but really the entire month is when we can expect the stronger storms because we're coming off the end of summertime. We're coming off a lot of heating over the Gulf of Mexico. There's a lot of energy for these tropical systems in September, so it's not surprising that this is occurring now. But it just serves as a reminder to always be prepared because just a few weeks ago we were talking about the lull in tropical activity over the month of August, and now we're in September and just one storm is threatening us. And as we know, it's just one storm. It just takes one to really impact your life and your property. So we encourage everybody to always stay prepared and to never be lulled into a false sense of security.
And before the season even started, there were so many predictions about how active this year would be.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're still on track to maybe not meet those numbers. However, when this makes landfall, this will be the second storm making landfall in Florida this season. And so, I always say it doesn't, the seasonal forecasts, they matter in the grand scheme of things, but for your house or your neighborhood, again, it just takes one. And even, if this were forecasted to be a below average season, and if we do wind up being near average or below average, well, for us here in Florida, it's been pretty active with two landfalling systems.
Megan Borowski is a senior meteorologist for the Florida Public Radio Emergency Network. You can find an updated list of self-serve sandbag locations opening today on our website. That is cfpublic.org. There's more ahead here on Engage. Hear from U.S. Congressmen representing Central Floridians in Washington. Republican Bill Posey and Democrat Darren Soto discuss the looming government shutdown, housing costs, and the wave of students making threats of violence in Central Florida schools. All of our shows are available on demand at cfpublic.org. That is also where we are streaming live now. Thanks for listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. Ahead on this program, when people are confined to their homes during extreme weather emergencies, they will do what people do.
After Hurricane Katrina, at that time, 40% of people surveyed reported that they were having unprotected sex.
We will discuss the difficulties in procuring sexual and reproductive health products and services during hurricanes and other extreme weather events. First, though, House members on the Hill will vote for a government funding bill tomorrow. It's supposed to be an annual routine vote. This one is a stopgap to fund the government operations until the end of the year. Republicans had tied an election security provision called the SAVE Act to the funding bill that would reinforce an existing law making it illegal for non-citizen residents to vote, something that is already codified in federal law. Democrats said it was a redundant non-starter, and they successfully pressured House Speaker Mike Johnson to drop that provision. We asked representatives from both sides of the aisle to talk with us about the funding vote, as well as housing costs in Central Florida, and this spike in threats of violence against area schools. Darren Soto is a Democrat representing District 9, covering portions of Orange and Osceola counties. We spoke with him before the SAVE Act was dropped from the funding bill. We began our conversation by asking Soto why he's concerned about the Republicans' Election Security Act.
It's illegal for folks who aren't citizens to be able to vote, and it happens very rarely, whether in Florida or otherwise. And usually people get caught and go to jail. Now, really, what's behind this is trying to make it harder and narrow down the number of and types of IDs people can have right before a presidential election, with the hopes that less people will vote in the grand confusion and rush of a presidential election. Some of the fun and games, unfortunately, that are made with IDs in Florida include that you could use a hunting license, but often you can't use a college ID, which is a state-issued ID, as an example of the kind of games being played to favor some groups and some IDs over others that are issued by the state. So we have seen well-run elections in 2022 and 2020 with regard to the vote in Florida. Everybody has a paper ballot. You either have to show up at your polling place and with one of a range of IDs already allowed. And so we believe this is just another attempt to try to disenfranchise otherwise eligible voters across the nation.
Let me bring it back to Central Florida. You know, we're wading through this affordable housing crisis, not just in Central Florida, but throughout the country. Focusing on your district, how do you see the Federal Reserve lowering the interest rate by a half point as helping move the needle in your district, maybe insofar as facilitating affordable rates for home buyers and possibly tempering rent rates as well?
So this is going to definitely lower costs for new home buyers. It should ease some of the anxiety of people selling homes, which we've seen. Look, Central Florida is one of the most popular places to live in the nation now. It's a big surprise to a lot of long-term residents, but we have folks continue to come in from the Northeast, up from the Caribbean, and so the positive side of it is we've seen the biggest boon for homeowners, especially if you bought before the pandemic, and an increase in generational wealth. But for those struggling to with rent or to buy their first home, it's a real challenge. And so first and foremost, we have to pass a generational housing bill. We have boomers and millennials, everybody all in the market. People are living longer, and that's a good thing. But it also means we have a huge housing shortage of about 3 million plus units. And so I'm going to continue to work with the Biden administration and with Vice President Harris. Of course, it has become part of a campaign platform for the vice president as well to build over 3 million new homes. So that's the big solution we need. In the meantime, we'll work on a lot of smaller solutions like the over 5 affordable housing projects we have in Osceola. Orlando is using $50 million from American Rescue Plan dollars for affordable housing there as well. And the last thing I'll say is, look, this drop in interest rates, 0.5%, it's really a recognition that we're finally getting inflation back towards our target of 2%. We saw it go down to 2.5% in August, a 3-year low. So a lot of this pandemic caused inflation is finally getting back to normal. Supply chains finally getting back to normal, increasing our workforce, whether through folks getting back to work or through immigration programs that are increasing our workforce. And so the Fed feels comfortable enough to be able to lower rates. We still have work to do to get down to the 2% inflation target, but this was a major recognition this past week, and it's going to save money. It's going to save and lower costs for Central Floridians, especially those trying to buy a home, and we're very excited about that.
We're speaking with U.S. Representative Darren Soto today. A follow-up on an economic issue for you. Indicators point to a robust, growing economy. Consumers are broadcasting discontent. I'm thinking of those housing prices, childcare costs, food being these top-line issues. Vice President Kamala Harris indicated she would like to address consumer costs at the retail level. What's your take?
Well, first of all, with childcare costs, which you mentioned, we want to increase the child tax credit back to the levels they were at for the American Rescue Plan, which made a lot more people eligible, and it reduced child poverty in half. Of course, the housing plan we just discussed. With food prices, a lot of it is workforce. To make sure we have enough farm workers. And that means a robust immigration policy. It also means continue to work on major inputs like fertilizer and gas and helping our farmers by passing a farm bill, something that we're continuing to work on here. On occasion, you do see some anti-competition issues and some price gouging. And so being aggressive on policing those also important. Look, we have a lot of consolidation in the ag industry and in food producers, and especially in meat processing, among other areas that we saw spike during the pandemic. So we do have to have a healthy, be on the lookout for when you see price gouging on occasion and when you see too much consolidation. Sometimes as you get to larger companies, it could give you better economies of scale and lower costs, but sometimes the people start to collude, either directly or indirectly, it could lead to longer, higher prices. So we do need to be active with the U.S. Department of Justice on antitrust issues and where available, FTC and other agencies for price gouging. So we have to remain vigilant, and these are already laws in the books that need to be enforced when applicable.
Congressman Soto, I have to ask you about this. Just in the past week or so, we have seen several threats to school safety. I'm talking about an 11-year-old student in Central Florida stopped with a hit list, cache of weapons. There have been so many online threats. Area sheriffs are, voicing their just absolute frustration with this. Is there a federal approach to this?
Well, there's several things we could do. One, we already passed the Safer Communities Act, which provided for record funding for gun safety and mental health. And it's something that we're urging our school districts and local sheriffs to participate in. We have not seen a lot of that money come to Florida because our local governments have not been applying as much, and they've been very aggressive in a lot of other areas. So first, I encourage our local law enforcement to apply for Safer Communities Act grants to help with school safety, help with training, with resources. This was the first gun safety law passed in 30 years. Secondly, we do have to take threats seriously. And unfortunately, we've seen folks who are both younger and older make threats. And so we're grappling with the various different ways to handle that. But we do have to take them seriously. We've seen in Parkland and just recently in Georgia, unfortunately, young people who were investigated and then the investigation stopped and they turned out to shoot up their school. We also need to continue with school resources. We also can be making sure to pass the assault weapons ban, something that I'm supportive of. These weapons of war definitely make it far more deadly when these shootings happen. And then we're seeing something that is occurring more often that already exists in existing law, which is sometimes parents who are enabling end up becoming liable when you give a child or someone who's intoxicated or someone who's incapacitated a dangerous item, whether it's a car or a gun, or make it readily accessible, you could be liable under existing criminal law. So that's something that I know as the vast majority of parents are locking up their firearms, they're teaching their kids the right way. For the few who make the wrong decisions and people get hurt or get threatened to be hurt, this is something you're seeing more prosecutors prosecute. So this is something we'll be continuing to follow on too.
Democratic U.S. Congressman Darren Soto represents Florida's 9th district that primarily covers Osceola and parts of Orange County. Bill Posey is the Republican congressman representing the east coast of Florida from the Titusville area to Vero Beach. We spoke with Posey yesterday after the Save Election Security Act was stripped from the funding bill. I asked Representative Posey if he supported the bill as a standalone and he began our conversation by explaining why he does not.
Well, I didn't come here to pass CRs. I came here to make government more accountable, and you do that with appropriations bills. We've passed them each year. I think we've got 70% of the appropriations bills have passed here already and sent them over to the Senate. And as usual, the Senate is ignoring them. And they like to live on CRs, which is, business as usual, which is business is bad. And, I most generally opposed to CRs for that purpose.
Help me understand, Congressman, why support the SAVE Act if it is already illegal for undocumented residents to vote?
Well, it used to be illegal for undocumented people to enter this country illegally and wander loose, unattached as well, didn't it?
I think I'm trying to get at, why do you need a SAVE Act that is already guaranteeing something that exists? The law is already in place to keep illegal immigrants from voting. So why do we need the SAVE Act to confirm something that's already there?
Well, the same reason we need to have a wall on our southern border. It's already illegal to cross into our country illegally, much less to encourage people to come into our country illegally, which then we support.
So a vote is scheduled for Wednesday to extend federal funding through late December, and then the next funding vote will come up. How do you stop this from becoming another kicking of the can scenario?
Well, I don't know that I can stop it. I just do all I can. I vote for the stuff when it makes sense, and I vote against it when it doesn't make sense.
What is your message to constituents who maybe you're kind of tired of seeing the same cycle of short-term fix, keep the government going, and then, we expect the cycle to just keep happening?
Well, you said it really perfectly. I'm as sick of it happening, kicking the can down the road, as most of my constituents are. We need to get back to the process of doing appropriations bills and actually doing budgets. I mean, this is my 16th year, Sharon, and we have not done that yet. We've before passed every appropriations bill to fund every agency over to the Senate, and they refuse to take them up. They just want a CR. Then they put all their pork into the CR, and I think, that's what drives the last minute spending bills. Americans are dealing with the reality of inflation and high prices, and much of that is was not due to the attack on fossil fuel, is due to the annual $2 trillion deficits. There's no long-term plan to control spending and balance the budget, none. I got the only balanced budget amendment in over 25 years to the floor, and it failed to pass. It got a majority, but it didn't get the 2/3 needed. It's just like, people aren't in reality. They just think we can continue to borrow ourselves out of debt forever. And there's never going to be a time to come to pay the piper. And I'm afraid that they're wrong. And until these fundamental changes are made, Americans will be stuck with inflation. I don't think you can raise enough taxes to fill the deficits without doing serious harm to the Americans who are struggling to pay bills, like their insurance bill that you want to talk about later, and their food prices, their gas prices. I mean, it's just crazy. And the less you make, of course, the more it harms you. I mean, if you're wealthy, you don't care what a price of bread costs, and you're not worried about paying $3.50 a gallon for gasoline. But if you're middle America and you're working hard to make ends meet, those are really serious kicks to the shins.
And I do want to ask you about the economy. First, though, earlier this month, former President Trump posted the following to his Truth Social account. If Republicans in the House and Senate don't get absolute assurances on election security, they should in no way, shape, or form go forward with the continuing resolution on the budget. Democrats are trying to stuff voter registrations with illegal aliens. Don't let it happen. Close it down. So what response do you expect from the former president if this does pass on Wednesday?
Well, I have no idea, what his response is, but I agree with him.
So last week, Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene was quoted as saying, "Our Republican House majority has failed completely." Texas Representative Chip Roy said on the House floor, "One thing, I want my Republican colleagues to give me one thing, one, that I can go campaign on and say we did." Congressman, do you have faith Republicans can maintain or grow their majority? And if so, why?
Well, unlike the Democrats, Republicans don't all vote like they're told. And I've been on the defecting side of some of the things that the speakers in the past have been in favor of too, like continuing resolutions, by the way, voted against most of them. And it just has to make sense to vote for it. And a lot of it is based on the simple economic principles that you and I have just talked about the inflation in the budget and the financial condition of the federal government.
Bringing this back to Central Florida, so we're wading through an affordable housing crisis, not just in Central Florida, but really throughout the country. Focusing on your district, how do you see the Federal Reserve lowering the interest rate by 0.5 point last week, helping move the needle in your district insofar as facilitating affordable rates for homebuyers and perhaps tempering rent rates?
I don't think it'll help. We've added over 10 million people to the population. And typically unemployable people, if you don't have the credentials to work, obviously, you can't earn your pay. They have to be housed somewhere. We've had an explosion of rental units throughout my district. There's hardly a city in the district that doesn't have new multi-story, multiple family housing. And, I'm guessing that those investors are betting on the come that there's going to be more, but the prices are still exceedingly high.
Another issue has been top of line in Central Florida, especially as of late. We have seen local law enforcement, school districts just overrun with these threats of violence and threatening to school shootings online, these threats. Is there a federal approach to curbing this?
Well, we have seen the federal approach, and I hate to make this real partisan, but when you have the person now running for president of the United States bailing out looters and rioters from the BLM riots, I think they said there were over 700 of them across the nation a few years ago. That didn't set a real good tone. We hear all about the insurrection on January 6th, but we see nothing about the attack on the White House that injured 120 Secret Service and Park Police. I think the administration has done whatever they could to stir the pot for whatever reason. I don't think that's good for America. It's already a very divided country philosophically, and I think that sets a very poor tone. You've seen the YouTube videos as well as I do of Chuck Schumer, threatening the Supreme Court that they're going to pay. You've seen members of Congress do videos like the gentleman from, I'm thinking Maryland maybe, that said Trump needs to be eliminated. You've seen the former chairman of the Financial Services Committee that I say on saying, you need to get to the Republicans, you need to get in their face. And so, I think they're stoking a lot of this stuff, quite frankly. I'm sad to say it, but you asked my opinion and I told you.
Any thoughts on what the solution could be then?
Well, the solution is just people have to try and be a little bit more civil. If you ever listen to the debate on C-SPAN, Republicans hate women, they hate children, they hate puppies, they hate kittens, they hate manatees, they hate rabbits. Republicans are all, I think Alan Grayson called us prehistoric man, knuckle dragging whatevers. And, you don't hear that coming from our side. I mean, you really don't hear that kind of stuff coming from our side, but they can't make a statement without talking about a mega extremist, And what's a mega extremist? It's somebody that wants to balance the budget. It's somebody that wants to secure the border. It's somebody that wants to make sure only Americans vote in American elections. It's somebody that doesn't want to defund the police. That's a mega extremist if in these hallways.
Do you feel like Republicans have any role in spreading that type of rhetoric and that hate speech that you're kind of talking about?
Hey, I'm sure that there's some. There's some videos that I haven't seen before. It usually takes two to tangle.
Last question, because I want to make sure I get your full statement. We were just talking about the economy and economic indicators pointing to a thriving economy. But on a consumer level, Floridians are dealing with these housing costs we've talked about, insurance, food costs. Democrats have indicated the problem lies with retailers and price gouging. What do you see as the source of this disparity in perception of the economy?
Well, when you say you want to eliminate fossil fuels in the next 5 to 10 years, then that will drive the price of everything up. Fuel becomes more rare, and it's more explosive in the rising of the rates. Everything in the room that you're sitting in, and the room that I'm sitting in, and the buildings we're sitting in, has a fossil fuel-based component, a petroleum-based component. It's not just the transportation of the product to wherever it is, but it's in the manufacturing of it, in the operation of the machines, transporting the machines, employees getting back and forth to work. I mean, there's nothing that's not impacted by the higher costs of fossil fuels or petroleum. And they can say this economy is exploding and everything's good, but there's not many people in my district that are saying that. And again, it really doesn't sound like a thriving economy with the inflation we have, the high cost of energy, the massive debt, the high prices that people are experiencing. And as we said, it's the lower your income, the harder you're hit by this stuff. A loaf of bread, somebody that's wealthy, they don't worry about the loaf of bread or the cost of eggs or a gallon of gasoline, but the less money you make, the bigger impact these higher prices are going to have on you personally. And that's what I hear from at home. Nobody's happy, and especially retirees. I mean, people think, well, I'm able to retire on such and such, and when I was working, this should have been sufficient to support me. But when I think the inflation since I've been here, has been like almost 150% since I've been in Congress, and so it's really especially harmful to people on lower incomes and fixed incomes for sure.
Republican U.S. Congressman Bill Posey represents Florida's 8th district that includes Brevard and Indian River counties, in addition to part of East Orange. Coming up, hear why sexual health kits are being distributed here for FEMA Emergency Preparedness Month. Just a reminder, we want to hear from you. Let us know what you'd like to hear more about. You can send us an email to engage@cfpublic.org, or you can send us a talkback on the free Central Florida Public Media app. You are listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. When you think about storm preparation, you may think about having food or water, pet supplies, maybe a battery-operated radio, having all that ready. Well, sexual health kits are being distributed across the state for FEMA Emergency Preparedness Month. To be clear, this is not an official event sanctioned by that agency. But several groups are giving out these kits to demonstrate the importance of preparing for reproductive health disruptions during extreme weather. They have some stops planned in Jacksonville, Tampa, and Miami. They're scheduled to be in Orlando on Sunday. Organizers of the event say the perfect storm is brewing that may hurt the health of Floridians and climate change has a disproportionate impact.
The effects of rising greenhouse gas emissions are more harmful to women, gender diverse people, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and people with these identities already deal with complex financial inequalities, hostile healthcare environments, and they have disproportionate emergency costs. So when they have this kind of a situation, everything is just amplified, 10, 50, 100-fold or more. And it lasts longer too. The impact lasts longer for them. Most studies have also shown an increase in gender-based violence during and after extreme events. Women are also more likely to be caretakers, which presents a whole other set of challenges. It makes evacuation or relocating to a shelter much more difficult. A really stark and shocking statistic that I learned recently is that the UN estimates 80% of people displaced worldwide by climate change are women. 80%, 80.
That was Rachel Kinbar, an organizer with Central Florida Mutual Aid. That's one of the organizations involved in the sexual health kit distributions. She joined Engage to talk about the free giveaway happening in Orlando this weekend to support vulnerable communities.
This is a partnership between the Center for Biological Diversity, the Justice Advocacy Network, and Jackson Period Pantry, as well as Central Florida Mutual Aid. And we come at it from different perspectives. So there are the people who are specifically doing sexual and reproductive health. There are people who are looking at it from the environmental perspective. And Central Florida Mutual Aid does a bit of both. In our experience and just talking with people based on their lived experience through hurricanes, we know that people are already impacted by a lot of systems. So people have limited access to abortion and reproductive services, as well as supplies like condoms, emergency contraceptive, and things like that. So when a hurricane happens, for example, just one example of an extreme weather event, that access is even further limited. For example, if an abortion clinic shuts down during a hurricane or is unable to reopen for X amount of time, people cannot access those services. So when these things happen, people, like all of the situations where people don't have funds for things, they don't have access due to transportation or other issues, or the hours or time frame is just limited, those things are just exacerbated when something like a hurricane happens.
When you're thinking about getting ready for a hurricane, I would argue that most people think about get your batteries, get your flashlights, have your water ready. Why is it that these sexual health kits should also be just as top of mind for people when it comes to emergency preparedness?
Sure. So a lot of these lists, these hurricane preparedness lists, they'll include things like diapers and formula, but there are the things that come before that. So if you don't have condoms, you might end up with that baby. If it's an unintended pregnancy, that might be an issue. So I can give a statistic. After Hurricane Katrina, at that time, 40% of people surveyed reported that they were having unprotected sex. And this was due to a variety of reasons. Obviously, Hurricane Katrina is an extreme example where people just did not have access for a long period of time. Family planning services were disrupted for 5 to 6 months after the storm. So people could not access services. And one of the ways people can prepare for that kind of a situation, even if it's just a week without access, that's an issue. So one of the ways people can prepare, and families and communities, is by getting these items prepared in advance.
Will you talk to me a bit about this from a historic perspective, the impact that storms like Katrina or Ike have had on people?
Yes. So, we also saw this after Ian, where roads were flooded. People could not get out of their homes for quite a while. There were neighborhoods, especially in West Orlando and actually East Orlando too, near the university, where there were just so many disruptions to services and limited access because people were literally prevented from getting anywhere due to the flooding. So what has happened, during that hurricane, and then Ike in Texas and Katrina in various parts of the country, but especially New Orleans. So I already mentioned that statistic, about 40% of people were having unprotected sex. Services were disrupted 5 to 6 months after the storm. 4% of people experienced an unintended pregnancy after Hurricane Katrina due to limited access. There's also a statistic from Hurricane Ike where, and this brings race into the issue, where Black women could not access contraceptives with the same ease that white women could.
Tell me about the event coming up on the 29th.
Yes, so we are excited about this. This is going to be the first really, really free market in Orlando. It is going to be taking place at 2619 Pine Hills Road. It's being organized by a person named Severin Charleston and his organization, the Seeds of Pine Hills. And this is something they've been wanting to do for a while. And so as soon as they were able to get it off the ground, we were really excited to be participating. Basically, everyone who comes there just has things for free. So there's no money exchanged. We thought it would be a really great opportunity to distribute the sexual health emergency preparedness kits. And there's going to be a lot of other individuals and groups there distributing things as well.
We're talking with Rachel Kinbar with Central Florida Mutual Aid. Talk to me about the kits and the items that you put in them and why.
Yes, so the kits will include condoms, emergency contraceptive, period products, pregnancy tests, lubricant, as well as some informational materials. These are all the things that we feel really address the various issues that arise when people have limited access. So it's both sexual and reproductive health items.
I'm wondering if you see any challenges with Florida specifically. I'm thinking about the policies here with sexual and reproductive health and the correlation to the extreme weather events in the region.
Yeah, so Florida's deteriorating reproductive healthcare landscape, it's already affecting millions of people, hurricanes and other issues like extreme heat aside. And the 6-week abortion ban in particular presents a huge problem. So most people don't even know until weeks 4 to 6 that they're pregnant. So what we actually have is like a 2-week abortion ban in place, realistically speaking. If that happens around a hurricane, that goes down to a 1 or 0 week, like a full abortion ban effectively, because clinics close, people can't access care for a variety of reasons. So that on its own is a really big issue. My hope is that voters in Florida will vote yes on Amendment 4 in November and reverse that ban and ensure abortion access for Floridians. Another issue, which hasn't gotten as much attention, was this HB 1645, which also went into effect on July 1st. And most mentions of climate change were deleted from the state's energy policy. So this wasn't just a change in terminology. What this meant was that any efforts at reducing or requiring an attempt to reduce greenhouse gas emissions has been removed from Florida's energy policy completely. So this is completely a short-sighted approach. It's very damaging for both the planet, for the beautiful wild Florida that we all love, and for Floridians ultimately.
I know that you do work all year long distributing emergency contraceptives in the community. I'm curious how you picked where to target these events for the FEMA Emergency Preparedness Month specifically.
Yes. So one of the things when I was speaking with Seven, who I mentioned earlier, is organizing the really, really free market. One of the things he spoke about with me was that he really wanted to create a space where the community felt safe and considered. The event is taking place in Pine Hills, which has a very large immigrant population. So these are people who often feel like they are left out of these kinds of issues and events. They are treated as second-class citizens, both in terms of preparation and response to these kinds of emergencies and in general, actually. So when Central Florida Mutual Aid was working in West Orlando and Orla Vista after Hurricane Ian, we were working in a neighborhood that had been severely flooded. And this was a community of immigrants from Cuba and other Spanish-speaking places. A lot of Haitians lived in that neighborhood, and they were not receiving the attention or care that they really needed in that very serious and dire situation. They had a 6-foot flood line in their homes. Many of them were trapped in their homes throughout the night in that, that horrible, dirty water. And it was just a really horrible situation. And so we grew a lot of close relationships with the people in those neighborhoods. And we just don't want to see people or other members of our community in that position again.
Rachel Kinbar is an organizer with Central Florida Mutual Aid. I just want to remind you we're keeping track of the tropics and the storm developing in the Gulf that could strengthen into a major hurricane. We have learned that some Central Florida schools will be closed later this week because of Tropical Storm Helene. The Sumter County School District announced that schools will be closed on Thursday and Friday. Lake County schools and district offices will be closed on Thursday. We've also learned Polk County schools will be closed Thursday and Friday. That's all for today's edition of Engage. Thank you for joining us. As always, we want to hear from you. Let us know what you'd like to hear more about, maybe what you're glad you heard. You can send us an email to engage@cfpublic.org. Send us a talkback on the free Central Florida Public Media app, or you can always give us a call, send us a voicemail. The number is 407-273-2300. Just hit extension 246 and we will get your message. Also, come join Engage for our live studio audience taping of Engage in Your Community, Central Florida Young Voters 2024. This is a remote taping of our show that is on Sunday, September 29th, 3 p.m. at Solid Rock Community Church in Kissimmee. I'm Sharon Stone. Thank you for the company. All Things Considered is coming up following NPR News.